On this episode of Elite Access, Dennis Johnson takes us on a 3,000-mile race across America on a bike in just 10 days, 17 hours, and 39 minutes. During this race, riders climb 6 times the height of Mount Everest. They battle blazing desert temperatures upwards of 120 degrees, and they ride day and night with very little sleep. In fact, this race is so grueling that of the just 48 solo riders that attempted it last year, only about half of them successfully completed it. In 2014, Dennis was the first American to finish this race, and he did it as a rookie and at the age of 60. He became the fastest 50-plus American rookie finish ever, and he set a new transcontinental record for a rider aged 60 and over. Dennis talks with us about how he went from an overweight former smoker to a record-breaking racer, how a bad event helped him prepare for an even bigger goal, and how he found his greatest strength by facing a seemingly insurmountable task. All right, Dennis Johnson, welcome to Elite Access. We are so honored. It is our absolute privilege to have you on here with us today.
Thanks. It's really good to be with you.
Now, you said that all too often, Race Across America seems to become a story about an epic journey of self-discovery. But your story is more about an epic race that seems to be through the mind of a racer. Now, I love this, but what strikes me the most about it is that just a few years ago, you were a former smoker, 50 pounds overweight, and out of shape, is what you described. So tell me a little bit about what motivated you to get off the couch and onto the bike, and how cycling made those competitive juices flow so quickly.
Well, you know, I've always been interested. I've always been very competitive, and I participated in sports in high school and college and all that. And I liked active hobbies later. I did skydiving and scuba diving and that sort of thing. But as I got older and involved in career and family, all those things just kind of get away from you. And it all took a back seat to just, to life. And I started smoking, and I smoked for quite a while. I got overweight. And when I finished stopped smoking, I got even more overweight. And so all that changed when I was in my early 50s, because my wife, Lori, and I decided to adopt a little girl from China. So I decided that, if I'm going to be in my 50s and I'm going to keep up with a toddler and be a responsible father, I got to get in shape. So I started riding a bike, and after a while, being a bit of an overachiever, I started doing some racing, and I started doing 12 and 24-hour races. And then in 2009, I got together with my now coach, Kelly Moylan, and she's been coaching me ever since, and we got serious about it.
So you said you're an overachiever. Is it a competitive side of you, or are you just, I don't know, are you just type A? Like what is it about you? Are you just competitive?
I think it's definitely both, and there's definitely some type A going on there, but I compete with myself a lot, and so I'm always trying to, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so yeah, just kind of, I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it all the way.
Yeah, we'll be trouble if we hang out more often. So you kind of started all this by doing the Race Across Oregon in 2010, and you said that was a good stepping stone to the Race Across the West, which you did in 2011, and you described that as a magical race with absolutely perfect conditions. You finished several hours ahead of what you said would be your best case scenario, and that amazing race made you think that Race Across America was actually possible. But just 2 months after doing the Race Across the West, you ended up in a hospital bed for 5 days with DVT in your leg and blood clots in both lungs. A doctor said you probably did that right after the Raw event, and that you were doing workouts with the blood clots. So they said you're lucky, it can strike anybody. You said it inspired you to start racing to raise funds and awareness for the National Blood Clot Alliance, stoptheclot.org. Did that just make you think you were done cycling at that point? Here you are thinking you can race across America, and all of a sudden you're on a hospital bed. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and that was pretty frightening, and I must admit that for that 5 or 6 days I was in the hospital, I really kind of figured the cycling was done. For a little while there, I was more worried about just staying around, and but after once we got things stabilized and they got me on anticoagulants, and I went through all the treatments. And they tested me for any genetic predispositions to clotting disorders, and I didn't have any of those. So we decided it was probably kind of a one-off thing that just happened because of the being dehydrated and the wear and tear from the race, and mostly from finishing at altitude in Durango. Across the west goes from outside California to Durango, Colorado. Finish at about 7,000 feet. And so it's kind of like, going through a race and stepping on a plane. So it was probably just that. And so they treated me for about 6 months and then said I was good to go. But I still take certain precautions before I do races, since I am, they say I'm a little bit higher risk now. But it's something that athletes should really be aware of, and particularly women athletes. Because
really?
Yeah, for example, birth control pills are one of the things that can lead to blood clots. And I see stories every day about athletes getting blood clots. You can deal with it with the right precautions. You can deal with it, but it's something to take precautions and be aware of.
Many people have a disappointing competition and they start to feel like a failure, and maybe they reevaluate, like, should I even be doing this if I just didn't have the race that I wanted? Well, when you went to do Race Across the West Raw a second time in 2013, it was not so magical. It was bad conditions and you were several hours slower, but you said that race helped you shape how you were going to train for Race Across America and how you were going to approach it. So tell us about how this not so great race helped you prepare for your greater goal of the RAM, the Race Across America.
Well, Raw taught me a lot of things, and it was very valuable in a lot of ways. But one of the biggest things, it taught me a valuable lesson about dealing with the potential downsides of high expectations. And I think everybody's gone through that. As you said, 2011 was an incredible race. We didn't have huge expectations. Official finish is like 90 hours. And Kelly and I thought, 80 hours would be a good race. And I told my crew before the race that 75 would be a great race. And, well, everything went just perfectly. We had good conditions. It wasn't ridiculously hot in the desert. And we finished in under 66 hours. So the first thing, like most people, I started thinking, I can do this faster. And so once it took me a year and a half to get back and ready after the blood clot problem. But I felt like I was stronger, and I went out there really thinking I'm going to at least break 60 hours, and I'm going to be, up in the front of the race. So we started off the race, and it's about 5 hours of climbing right out of the box up over the coastal range. It was over 100 degrees right from the beginning. And the next day in the desert, the temperatures were over 120. In fact, I recorded on my bike out on the highway at one point at 125. So we got to Congress, Arizona, and it's right at the end of the flats before you start the serious climbing up in the crest. And we stopped there. I was in pretty bad shape, and we checked, and there was some pretty significant amount of blood in my urine. So I was not in good shape at all. And we decided to rest for about an hour and a half. And then we got back in climbing. And the whole rest of the race was just really a struggle. And such an incredible contrast to it seemed like an almost easy race the first time around. Right. And even though I was stronger and in some ways rode a better race, because of the conditions I was 2 hours slower, although I did finish in second place, which was better, it really showed me that, you got not to get down when my own expectations aren't being met, and just stick it out and pay attention to what my other competitors are doing, and just keep going, and not worry about the fact that I expected to be at a different point in the race. So that was really valuable.
Now, on your race crew going into RAM, you had a very valuable leader giving you insight because he was also a successful solo RAM racer, Tim Woutenberg. And in fact, Tim's record was one of the ones you were trying to break in your RAM race. And here he was helping you attempt to break it. Does that just say something about Tim's sportsmanship, or does this describe kind of your whole community of ultra cyclists?
Well, probably both. Tim is an amazing guy, and I didn't really know him very well before the race. He was a friend of another cycling friend, and I met him a few times. I really admired him. He was a very established racer. He had a transcontinental record, and so I was actually kind of intimidated by Tim. But he generously offered to crew,
Wow.
and I'm really glad he did, because there were some really tough times during the race, and he really threw a lot of those, and always was pushing me to break that record. So that was really special. But that's also fairly kind of a common thing in the ultra cycling community, because it's a small sport. Nobody's out there there's very few sponsorships of any kind. Nobody's making any money. So there's a real sense of just being out there to better yourself, and a great camaraderie. So in a lot of races I've seen riders stop and help other riders, and this is like Ram or Raw, which is crewed. One team's crew will stop and help another crew if they're having problems. So it's part of the sport. And at the end of the race, Tim was 56 last year during the race. He said, "Well, 4 years, I'm going to try to come back and take my record."
Nice.
And I agreed, if he does that I'll crew for him.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Rising tide lifts all ships, right?
That's right.
I love it. So, okay, let's talk goals. I'm a very goal-oriented gal, and I see that you are also. So, again, we can be fast friends here. So you had 3 huge goals going into your Ram race. And the first one was to win the 60-plus age group. And the second one was to finish faster than the 2008 60-plus record of 11 days, 3 hours. And I'm sorry, just anything you're doing straight for 11 days is just beyond me, okay? I'm so in awe of what you've done. Your third goal was to beat Tim's 2010 overall recumbent record of 11 days even. So can you tell us how you went about preparing to achieve those goals? Because it's great to have big goals and big dreams, but if you have no plan of action to get there, it's going to stay out of reach, right? So what was your plan of attack?
Well, there are kind of 2 factors in Ram that make this all very difficult. I mean, it's a very difficult, complicated race. But in terms of pacing, there are 2 issues. One is that you're racing point to point, clear across the country for almost 2 weeks. And therefore, there's no way to predict what kind of conditions you're going to be going through. You might have tailwinds, you might have headwinds, crosswinds, you have to slow down and stop for a tornado. There are road construction, waiting for trains. Everything in real life is out there, and that's just part of the race. So that makes trying to set up and racing to a particular time pace difficult. But the other side of that is, and that's why head-to-head racing is so important, but the other side of that is a relatively limited number of racers over incredibly vast distance. And so, once you get much past the start, after a couple of days, you don't see racers very often. In fact, usually you'll pass somebody when they go down to sleep or have to stop for something. And it's amazing, but at the end of the first 4 days, I was in eastern Colorado. And from that point until Maryland, 12 hours before the end of the race, I never saw another single racer, a solo racer, on the road. I never passed them, had them pass me. I passed racers, but it always happened out of sight. They would stop for sleep or something like that. But otherwise, you're out there all by yourself. And that gets to be a little weird.
Yeah.
It's really hard to keep yourself motivated. And so that's when a pacing plan that says this is where we should be to keep you motivated, to keep you going is important. Now, I should say we do have GPS tracking, and we had Wi-Fi in the follow band, so they could see where other racers were, on a computer. But that sort of becomes virtual racing after a while, and so that really doesn't help. It's not like having somebody out on the road that you're chasing.
Right, that you can see, yeah.
Exactly. So I spent about 9 months before the race working through the pacing. And I had, for the first third, I had a real good data because the raw goes in the same course as Ram. And so I had 2 years of races in very different conditions. So I kind of had my own data for that. For the rest of it, I looked at, picked out lots of previous racers over the previous years and the ones that I thought would be similar to my performance, and looked at every one of their sections. The RAM is broken down into about 55 time stations coming across. So I looked at their times one time station another over many years. I used all that data, and then I also studied all the terrain maps, so I knew every foot of the course, and to come up with what I thought was the reasonable speed between every one of those time stations to get me to the two records. And it was amazing. It turned out really well. We were pretty much, it was right on the money. We knew in Colorado, we had a good idea what we thought we were going to end up compared to the records.
Wow, so it was pretty accurate then.
Yeah, it was worth the time.
A great plan. It's it's amazing the amount of time you put in preparing that plan to get ready for this race. 9 months you said you were putting all of that data together. To accomplish something huge like that, it takes a lot of preparation, not just physical training, but a lot of the mental side too, to get your mind in the right place and to get all the tools available for you, right?
It's really important. We had three people in the follow band, and they worked in 3 shifts, and a driver, a navigator who is working on a computer that tracks against the course. You have to travel the exact course. You can't make any adjustments to go around the wrong block or anything like that. And then the third person was my feeder, and they also tracked all the other competitors, and they tracked where we were on compared to our pacing. And they also were constantly checking weather, so we could make decisions about what the weather was doing ahead of us, whether we wanted to stop or sleep or delay, and so on. So it's 3 very busy people.
Wow, that's very very cool, very complicated, but very cool. So and this is a 3,000-mile race across the country, and so you're obviously going to have a few obstacles you're going to run into. And at one point you were blown clear off your bike by 70-plus-mile-an-hour winds. Across the side of the road and off your bike completely. You had an ankle injury toward the end that you really thought might have been the end of it. You might have had to stop early. But the hardest battle proved to be sleep deprivation, just trying to stay awake on the bike and keep it together. Tell us about this turning point that you had in El Dorado.
Okay, so El Dorado is a little bit past halfway across Kansas, and I had been doing pretty well on sleep. We didn't sleep the first night. I slept an hour and a half the second night, and then 3 hours a night after
That's doing pretty good on sleep.
Yeah,
wow.
And actually that's pretty good.
I guess having your toddler helped you prepare for that, right?
Yeah, and so it was early in the morning. And normally I was having trouble staying awake to the last. I was trying to sleep between like about 3 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock, so I'd wake up when it was light out. And I was struggling from about midnight to 3 o'clock to stay awake. But now I woke up, I got on the bike, and after about an hour and a half, as it just became dawn, I just could not stay awake. I finally stopped, and I told the guys I was really in trouble. I couldn't keep going. And that was the time when for the first time and only time in the race, the crew really got in my face. The guys that were on shift, they came up to me and got down and said, "Listen, man, you need to fight. This is it. The race has finally started. You've been doing great, but from here on out, it's going to be brutal. And you're going to have to fight this. And you decide, what do you want to do?" And I learned really 2 things. Well, the first was, we talked about what I needed to do, and it's hard to fight being sleepy. That's not something you can get your hands around. And I have always believed that, your strength reserves, how you access those when you're really in trouble, is not by an act of will or determination, but rather you try to access your deepest emotions. So I got back on the bike. I started riding much faster than I should have been according to pace, but just as hard as I possibly could. And I started, putting myself in an emotional state that I knew would help. I played heroic music. I thought about my father and whether he was still alive, whether he'd be proud of me. I thought about one of my best friends, who was my crew chief in 2011, and had since died of cancer. And actually, in one of the support bands, we had some of his ashes that his son had asked us to take to Annapolis with us to spread in the bay. And I thought about my wife and daughter, Lori and Quinn, and how much I loved them, and I really kind of pulled all those people around me, and I got angry. And it went on, the fight that went on for several hours. But I think eventually worked my way through it, and it really taught me, what the source of that strength and those reserves was. The other thing was the rest of the day wasn't much better. it we fought all day long. By the time that the crew came on, second shift crew came on at about 4 o'clock, and I told them over the radio, I said, guys, I don't want to talk. Just leave me alone. All I want to do is see if I can keep the pedals turning over. And then at about midnight, we reached Lake of the Ozarks, and we had to go from Lake of the Ozarks we wanted to get to Jefferson City before we stopped to sleep, which is about another 4 hours. And it was a terrible night. It was the first time I started to lose touch with reality. I didn't know where I was. I thought they were leading me in circles. For a while, I didn't even know I was in a race. I just knew I was out in the darkness, in the middle of the night, someplace on my bike, and it was pretty tough. But here's the thing. The lesson I took away from that was that a lot of times a finish doesn't depend upon how you do when you're performing your best. It's how you deal with when you're performing your worst. Because first of all, in terms of records, up until that point, we had been almost an hour, as much as an hour and a half ahead of our the pace for the both records. That morning, I didn't know about this till later, but when that all was starting that morning, I went back and looked, and we'd fallen to 30 minutes behind record pace, and it was getting worse by the minute. When we arrived in Jefferson City at 4 o'clock the next morning, I was back on pace exactly to the minute. So I actually gained the time back through all that struggle. The other thing was,
that's incredible.
That morning we were in 12th place. And again, I really wasn't focused on that. I was just focused on surviving, hour to hour. But we were in 12th place. And even though I never saw them, it turns out by the time we reached Jefferson City that next morning, we had passed 4 riders, and I was now in 8th place. And interestingly, 2 of those 4 riders, one was Chris Hopkinson, who is a great ultra cyclist from the UK, and the other one is a rider named John Bergen. And I didn't know it at the time, but John Bergen was the lead American. And so it was that day that I passed those riders, moved up to 8th place, became the lead American, and got back on pace for the records, even though it was the worst day of the whole race for me. And the next day, it was when I getting ready to cross the Mississippi River, and I called Lori there's a system we have where I can make a phone call while riding my bike, hand-free phone call. And she told me, I talked to her every couple of days, and she said, you're the lead American. And I had no idea. And she said, yeah, you're in fact in 6th place or 8th place at that point. And I figured I was, way back from there. So I was shocked. But that changed everything from that point, because then trying to stay ahead of Bergen and remain the lead American became a major motivation for the rest of the race.
So, is that kind of, you said that you started the Ram as a solo rider with a crew, but then in the last 2 days, you said that your efforts became so intertwined that they were just indistinguishable driving toward that finish line in Annapolis. So is that kind of what brought you together, that you guys were suddenly in the lead, or what was it that really kind of solidified you and the crew together in like one mission?
Well, I think that was part of it. We were really focused at that point. I was so far ahead of the other 60-plus riders that they were no longer a factor. And I started gaining time back on the records. Suddenly here was this new motivation to try to remain the first American. And it was interesting. That was really driving us forward until we got to Eastern Ohio, and I started struggling again a little bit. And we went down for sleep, and I woke up in some muddy pasture somewhere. And they got me up, and while they were getting me ready, they said that we got good news and bad news. And the good news is you're still ahead of John Bergen. The bad news is he's 5 miles behind, and so he almost miles. And so we got back on and we started riding really hard. And the next small town, the crew were out on the streets with holding American flags. And that was just kind of pulled us all together to push towards the end from
I have goosebumps. That's so cool.
And it got really tough. And that was kind of a special thing for me because I've never felt in any way representative of a country until I've never been in a kind of event where there was so many other representatives of different countries. In RAM, out of 48 riders, there were 17 different countries represented.
Wow.
So there were a lot of folks out there, and it suddenly made me feel a little bit like I was, representing my country, which I know,
You
incredible experience. And the other thing was that from there to the end, it got really brutal. The last 36 hours of the race were the most brutal hours of my life. I've never been through anything like that. And I think I had to start depending on them a lot more, and it really pulled us together.
So I have to quote you, Dennis, because it's just awesome. I love what you wrote to explain to your friends and family and whoever was watching you on why you decided to do RAM. You said, somebody once said that endurance athletes are running away from something. But for me, I'm riding towards something, towards confronting the fear of facing my own limitations. Dreams don't mean anything if they're within easy reach, if they don't come with a high price. Setting aside simple daydreams and laying bare one's strength of character before a seemingly insurmountable task. Solo RAM is nothing less than a quest to find out who one is and what one is made of. I mean, did you discover who you are and what you're made of on that journey? I mean, can you tell us what exactly you did learn out there?
Well, you do find out a lot of things about yourself that you didn't know. It's so difficult and so overwhelming that you start to have to dig deeper than you ever have before to try to find reserves you weren't sure were there or not. I mean, feared weren't. And I learned that there were much deeper reserves than I had feared there would be. That I had a lot of strength when I needed to. But I also found out the only way I could access those kind of reserve were through other people, through the people I loved, through the crew. Having them there was the only way I could do that. The night before the race, I had a hotel room to be just by myself. I have to tell you, that night, I was terrified. I thought, how far is it to San Diego Airport? If I drive it, I can make a run for it, and we can just forget this whole thing. And I just didn't know. The idea of getting on the bike the next morning and racing 3,000 miles to Annapolis just didn't seem possible. And the idea of failure just seemed overwhelming. And I felt really, really alone. And that's what I learned at the end of the race was that I wasn't alone. And the fact that I wasn't made all the difference.
Oh, that is awesome. It is. There's nothing like facing your fears, is it? I mean, it's the most incredible thing when you can face them and overcome them, right?
Exactly.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life.
Now, I have to ask you, are you going to do it again?
Well,
I have to ask.
Yeah, Lori and I had an agreement. This was going to be a one-time only thing. She thought it was a little nuts, and I used to think it was pretty nuts. It is, of course, it's an extraordinarily expensive undertaking. But besides that, all those years of training really took a toll on the family, and and I understood we had to make it one time because of that. Although it was a couple months after the race, and we were talking about it, and Lori said, "Well, if we hadn't made that agreement, would you want to do it again?" And I said, "Absolutely." And she said, "Well, if we're going to do it again, this time I have to be on the crew." So, and Quinn will be old enough by then to be sure for her to be away. So I think my current plan is it's taken me a while to recover and get motivated. I'm back training again, and it's like I hope to do it in 2016 again, but I think it's going to be 2017 before I'm really ready. So it's going to take that long to get ready again. but I think I need to try it one more time.
That is cool. Oh, I love it. I was going to ask you if it was a one and done, like what keeps you motivated, but it's not. So that's exciting.
It took a while, and the other thing is when I stopped training, it took me about 6 months where I would, I rode some and I trained a little bit, but I wasn't on a real serious training schedule or anything. And I realized I just wasn't as healthy. I didn't feel as good. So if for no other reason, having that goal and staying in training makes me healthier and happier, and for all those reasons. But it's nice to have that goal again. So I have my first race coming up is in October, a 400-mile race. So I got a long ways to go.
Just a 400-mile race, no big deal, right?
And then a series of races next year, I think, and then hopefully Ram again in 2017.
Well, wow, Dennis, thank you so much for sharing your story for us. It's phenomenal. I think a lot of people are going to be inspired and learn a lot. You have such good lessons and good tools to give us and to share with us. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Well, I really, really enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Elite Access. And don't forget, you can gain an even greater advantage by answering the questions that go along with this episode and checking out all the extra resources.